Here's a question that a lot of people have been asking, and that is, do you know what your rights are after you've been laid off? One of the things that we understood very quickly was is that we needed to understand our rights after we were laid off. In this video, we're going to break down a few of the key points that you should be aware of after you've been laid off or terminated.
All right. So, think about it. You take your time getting into the office, whether you're, trying to get the kids off to school, doing breakfast, fighting traffic, and then you get settled in at your desk, right? You
Yeah.
get settled in, and then you get this phone call. Hey, can you stop by? I need to talk to you about something. And then boom, I'm sorry. We appreciate you and your service and your work, but we're gonna have to lay you off. And you're like, what? So
Yeah.
unfortunately, that's something that many of us have experienced, whether it was an in-office moment or a virtual moment. But, I think it's important that we kind of talk about your rights and what to expect after getting the news. So, with
Yeah.
that being said, let's go ahead and get into this Kiki. But before we do that, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and share so that you can get notified about any additional content that we have. Let's get into it.
The first component that we want to kind of get into is your employee agreement and compliance policy letter. So, if you've been laid off or terminated from your job, you should get a formal contract outlining the policy and terms of conditions of your layoff. That document should be very specific in terms of in determining the root cause of your termination or layoff. If you are eligible for a severance, it should outline that severance amount and not everybody I know gets a severance, so please make sure that you talk to your HR, or before you sign anything, make sure you understand your contract if you are due a severance. That document should also provide any obligations that the employer must feel before and after your termination, like your last day, your payroll, and any benefits that should be offered. So, Lakeisha, I know you and I both got that termination letter. It was, to say long, would be putting it mildly, but it was a very detailed letter. So, what was that like for you in terms of getting that document and kind of understanding what was in it?
For me, sometimes it's like you get an email, you open the attachment, and it's like, okay, I really don't want to read this book. But I just took the time, I printed it out and just grabbed my highlighter, went through the document slowly. Again, you want to understand exactly what it is that you're signing. Sometimes the legal jargon in there can be confusing.
Yeah.
So just take your time. If you have to reach out to friends and family, if you have someone that's in the legal field, have them look over it with you, or just go back to your HR partner and say, I don't clearly understand it. Can you explain it to me? I
Yeah.
just encourage you guys, if you're going through this experience and you're getting legal documents, make sure that you understand what you're signing.
100% back what you said there. The important thing was to print it out and go through it like a fine tooth comb, because you really need to understand everything in there, certainly before you sign anything, because it is a legal and binding documentation. So, one of the key points that we picked up on, which is our kind of our second key point, is your severance pay and your benefits. If you are offered a severance, it's typically paid in exchange for you as an employee agreeing to release the company from any future claims, i.e., meaning you can't sue them once you sign that document for wrongful termination. So, again, the importance of reading through your document to make sure that you understand the rules and policies of signing that document in terms of the legal aspects. One thing about the severance and the benefits, again, not everybody gets one, but I have read that you can negotiate a severance. So, if you're offered a severance and you don't feel like it's fair, you can certainly reach out to your HR partners and negotiate a severance. One of the key components for us, Keisha, and I remember this in detail, is that we, again, were fortunate that when we were laid off, we were offered extended benefits. So, if you don't have extended benefits offered in your separation agreement, that is one of the things that you could potentially negotiate.
Yeah, Kenneth, negotiate, negotiate, negotiate. Just like, some of us may have negotiated that offer letter coming in the door, you can negotiate that package going out the door.
Absolutely.
So don't shortchange yourself. A conversation is worth a conversation. The worst that they can say is no. The best that they can say is, okay, let's talk about it. So don't be afraid to be your own advocate in this situation. I think that that's very, very important.
Yeah.
Which kind of goes back to understanding what it is that you're signing. If you
Yeah.
don't know what you're signing, you don't put yourself in a position to be able to negotiate. So, negotiation is very important and definitely encourage you to do so.
The next key point that we kind of want to touch base on is your final paycheck. So this is where the conversation might get a little interesting. The first rule of thumb is that once you have read through your severance agreement and you get your final paycheck, double check it, triple check it to make sure that it is accurate. Make sure that you check to ensure that any unused vacation, any sick leave, if applicable, or bonuses that you are owed are included. But the key important there is to double check it, triple check it, because you want to make sure that it is accurate. Now, I was fortunate enough that mine were accurate, but but Keisha, I know you had a little bit of a different experience there. So why don't you share a little bit what happened with you and what you did to kind of get through that?
So again, it's important to understand what the standards or policies are with the company that you work for. Understand that before your last day. I had a situation where my vacation was not paid out
Mm.
accurately. Part of that was because the company went through a different payroll system when the new year flipped over. So there was a little confusion in terms of what those calculations were when we rolled over to that new system. So again, just understand what's owed to you, understand your company's policy. And again, do not be afraid to reach out to your HR partner or whoever it is that's helping you transition from your last day
Yeah. 100% agree there. And, again, that's why it's important to just check everything with accuracy because, the crazy thing is that Keisha, I know you experienced that. We kind of have a little phone chain going with all of our other colleagues that were laid off, and other people also experience discrepancies in their final paycheck. So every discrepancy was a little bit different. Make sure that you just are checking your
look,
final
you don't want
paycheck
nobody playing
and
with your
making sure
coins,
that
right? So just
everything is accurate.
make sure that you have all of your information so that if they do try to play with your coins, you can come back with them and say,
Right.
this is what is due to me. So
Yeah, don't be messing with my coins. So the next key point that we kind of want to dig into is about unemployment benefits and eligibility. So again, here is where it's very important for you to check with your local state unemployment office because every state has different requirements for applying for unemployment. The first step for me when I applied for unemployment was to confirm if I was eligible. Part of that was making sure, according to our state's website, that I had to be employed for the last 12 to 18 months. I also had to make sure that I had all the necessary information gathered. It is important that you have this detail gathered before you submit because it'll just make the process a lot easier. They're going to ask for your social security number, your driver's license. They're going to ask for your employer's address. They're going to ask for the dates that you were employed. So just have all that information ready so that you can easily submit that application. I will tell anybody that I am old school. I had some difficulties in submitting my request for unemployment, but I am one of these people. I will pick up the phone and call in a minute. And although there were some very extensive wait times, I picked up the phone and I called because I wanted to make sure that I had all the right documentation and that everything was submitted correctly. So don't be afraid to pick up the phone and talk to a human being because technology is great, but quite often it's better to talk with a real person to make sure that everything is completely understood from day one. Once you are approved, you'll either get your unemployment weekly or bi-weekly. Again, it depends on your state. One of the important things that I realized very early on is that I had to make sure that I disclosed my severance pay. Every state may be different, but for the state that we live in, it was very clear that I had to disclose my severance. And once I disclosed, they actually stopped my unemployment benefits. But again, I'm old school. I picked up the phone, like, what's happening? Why are you guys putting a pause? They told me that it was under review. Now, it took them about 4 weeks for that to all get reviewed. I was calling weekly to check on the status because again it was important for me to keep getting my coins, but eventually everything was approved, and received the official letter that I was approved and my unemployment benefits would continue. The key point of applying for your unemployment is the job search. So unemployment benefits, you have to be actively seeking for a job. And I think that that's true for most states, if not all. And the last point that we kind of want to get into is wrongful termination and legal protections. We are not lawyers, we are not attorneys, so this is just advice from our perspective. The only thing that I can say here that is if you suspect that you have been wrongfully terminated from your employment, you do have some legal options, but the best thing that you can do is consult an attorney. If you don't have the money to consult an attorney, you can reach out to the EEOC, which is the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, to file a claim. Now, the good news here is that I did a little research, and this is a government agency, but as of today's date, they have not laid off any employees. So if you need to reach out to the EEOC, do it now before things change.
Yeah, we're not lawyers. We don't have that background, but again, I always preach, use your resources, the internet. Look, nowadays we're using TikTok. But do your research, find some information so that if you do have to reach out to these organizations, you have information to give them as well as your story.
100% agree. A couple of last things that I thought about that I wanted to just briefly mention was when you talk about understanding your rights and your employer in terms of health benefits, we were fortunate that our company offered us extended health benefits through Cobra. They agreed to pay for that. That was all outlined in our separation agreement. All I will say to that is if your employer does not offer you any type of extended benefits, you do have a couple options. You can always apply with the ACA, which we know as the Affordable Care Act. Some of y'all might know that as Obamacare. But you do have that option. For me, my benefits are running out very soon, and I still needed healthcare coverage. So I did reach out to the ACA and I applied for my benefits. And I will say that I got a very reasonable price. It is basic healthcare insurance, but at least I had something. So take advantage of that. If you get Cobra, great. The key here is that Cobra is very expensive. So if you can't afford the Cobra, which most people can't, look into Obamacare because it's still there and it's still eligible for millions of Americans who need that support. Non-compete agreements as well. This is another key component. Make sure that in your separation agreement, you may have a non-compete agreement, meaning, you can't apply for the competitor of your current or employer that you're being laid off from. So make sure that you read through that again in detail, because if you have a non-compete clause in there, you need to make sure you adhere to that, because if you don't, then you will lose any protections or benefits that are owed to you. So then the last thing that I will say, and Keisha, you can bring this in as well, is we've said it over and over again, read everything very, very carefully, because once you sign, that's all, folks. So make sure that you read everything. Keisha, anything on that?
Oh, I think you covered that perfectly. Just know your rights, get as much information as you can, use your resources, utilize your resources to the best until you can't use them anymore.
Yeah, very true. So, it's all about your research, and we just touched base on just a few components. There are a lot more things that we could dig deeper into, but do your research. Make sure that you understand your rights so that you are protected should you find yourself in a situation where you are laid off or terminated from your job.
Absolutely. So we are coming to an end of today's Kiki, but I just want to remind you guys, look, we shared this journey because we thought that we could walk through this together and possibly help and motivate others that may be going through the same situation. Knowing your rights can empower you, can put you in a better position to be that advocate for yourself. If you believe that you have been terminated unlawfully or there's a wrongful termination, definitely reach out to those folks that can help you and guide you through that process, or at least, kind of advise you of your current situation. If you found this video to be helpful, please, please, please like, comment, share, subscribe. Tell your friends, tell your family. If there's anything that you all want us to talk on or touch on, please go ahead and put that comment down below, and we'll make sure to respond to you as quickly as possible. Kenneth, I'll hand it back over to you to close out today's Kiki.
Yeah, so just stay tuned for more insight on surviving a layoff. We're going to dig deeper into best practices for job searches and career transitions. We're going to talk about ways to save money on groceries, groceries. We all know that word, don't we? Groceries. For now, thanks for joining us today on Talk Time Life Unscripted. Have a great rest of the day. Ciao, ciao.
Bye bye.